Not only did she survive, but I just happened to see her. I was also working at a community clinic there. I happened to see her in the hallway at the community clinic a few weeks later. And I saw her and I said, "Oh, hi, Crystal. I bet you don't remember me, but I certainly remember you. And I'm so thrilled, to see you today." And she looks at her mother and she says, "Oh, no, I know him. I saw him put a tube in my nose." And of course, that was a time where we knew that she was, what we would call clinically dead. Her pupils were fixed and dilated. And, people often say, well, maybe they're actually seeing something. Well, we actually taped their eyes closed, while we're resuscitating them because they don't have a blink response. So, we don't want their eyes to get damaged by, stray pieces of dirt or stuff like that. So they're not seeing the operating room light or, things that people say. I, I feel quite an obligation to share our findings with you and your audience, Tia, because I am privileged in the sense that these are my own patients or patients, who were at the University of Washington and Seattle Children's Hospital. So, I knew that she was clinically dead.
I'm here today with Dr. Melvin Morse. Dr. Morse has always been involved with research primarily having to do with human consciousness. He has studied near death experiences, the spirituality of death and dying, spiritual neuroscience, and spiritual sight, a meditative practice. He identified that humans have a God spot, an area of the brain that links them to the divine that is both within us and of which we are part. Dr. Morse, thank you so much for joining me today. It is truly an honor to have you as my guest.
So much. It's such a pleasure to be on this show. And as we're going to see, before, while we're in our introductory phase, we discussed Tia's shared dying experience with her husband. And I know that many of you who are listening have had a variety of different spiritual experiences. And the question always comes up is, how do we know that they're real? Um, so I'm going to share that with you today. That much of my investigations have been, in fact, asking that very question. Um, and so I'll give a little bit more of an introduction. Uh, I was just like you, Tia. I trained at Johns Hopkins, um, trained primarily as a neuroscientist, working with chemotherapy for leukemia and its effects on the brain. That's most of what my research was when I was at the University of Washington. And I was a professor of pediatrics there. Um, and, I'd really never even, frankly, ever even heard of near-death experiences. And certainly, if I had heard of them, the neuroscientific model is that when we die, we die. We don't see a light when we die. Instead, you just check out into the darkness. So as you very nicely said, we're born alone and we die alone. Um, all of that changed for me when I was in Pocatello, Idaho, and I happened to be working for Airlift Northwest, which was a air transport service to Seattle Children's Hospital. And we picked up a young girl in Pocatello, Idaho, who had been nearly drowned in a community swimming pool. She was documented as being underwater for 20 minutes. And people often wonder, well, how is that possible that she survived? But, our slogan is, you're not dead until you're warm and dead. So she was protected in part by cold water. She had a very difficult resuscitation, and but we finally resuscitated her and transferred her to Primary Children's Hospital in Salt Lake City in Utah. And but there was a point where I invited her parents to her bedside and told them that I did not think she would survive, and that this would be a good time for them to say goodbye to her and to pray at the bedside and such as that. Uh, but she did survive, and not only did she survive, but I just happened to see her. I was also working at a community clinic there. I happened to see her in the hallway at the community clinic a few weeks later. And I saw her and I said, "Oh, hi, Crystal. I bet you don't remember me, but I certainly remember you. And I'm so thrilled, to see you today." And she looks at her mother and she says, "Oh no, I know him. I saw him put a tube in my nose." And of course, that was a time where we knew that she was, what we would call clinically dead. Her pupils were fixed and dilated. And, people often say, well, maybe they're actually seeing something. Well, we actually taped their eyes closed, while we're resuscitating them because they don't have a blink response. So, we don't want their eyes to get damaged by, stray pieces of dirt or stuff like that. So they're not seeing the operating room light or, things that people say. I, I feel quite an obligation to share our findings with you and your audience, Tia, because I am privileged in the sense that these are my own patients or patients, who were at the University of Washington and Seattle Children's Hospital. So, I knew that she was clinically dead. There's no question about it. Um, and yet, she went on to tell me everything that we were saying during her resuscitation, uh, chance comments that the nurses made to me. She said, "I saw you go to the phone and call someone and ask, what am I supposed to do now?" Which, in fact, was correct. I called my mentors at Seattle Children's Hospital and asked them what their advice was. She said, I saw you take me into a machine that looked like a big donut, which was her description of a CAT scanner. Um, and, I'm like, oh my God, I like giving this look on my face, like, wow, I'm sorry I even, I'm sorry I even, said hi, to hear all this stuff. And she sees the look on my face and she reaches over and she pats my hand and she said, "You'll see, Dr. Morse. Heaven is fun." So that was my first introduction to a near-death experience. Um, And I was in training as I said, a neurologist and a neuroscientist at the University of Washington. So I was, of course, very interested in this. We thought that it was, I think like I'm always reading on Facebook, people's ideas of, what these experiences could be. So we thought the same as I think everyone else is a lack of oxygen to her brain, or maybe it's the drugs that we give during resuscitation, all these different kinds. Maybe it's just from, fear from, some sort of reaction to the brain being in a scary intensive care unit, makes you want to believe that you're in heaven. So I returned to Seattle Children's Hospital and I reported my findings to the head of the intensive care unit and the head of the Department of Neurology and the head of psychiatry. And we determined to investigate these experiences for ourselves. And what we did was we systematically studied every survivor of cardiac arrest at Seattle Children's Hospital over about a 15-year period of time. So, that really sort of cleans up the whole sort of scientific investigation in the sense that we didn't take volunteers for our study, so attention seekers or people that, want to be on TV or on Oprah. We identified in advance the patients that we wanted to interview as being near death. And we didn't even tip our hands as to what we were interested in. Our study was titled "The Psychological Effects of Surviving a Pediatric Intensive Care Unit." So a very bland title like that. And we very carefully, for each patient, chose control patients. In other words, patients who had the same lack of oxygen to the body, had the same drugs on board, were also intubated, mechanically ventilated in a very scary intensive care unit environment. You take the average, 6-year-old child and you put them in an intensive care unit environment, and they think they're going to die. Of course they do. But the difference being that we knew they were not near death. So we had these two very clear-cut groups of children to study. And to our great surprise, virtually all the children that we studied who survived cardiac arrest had some sort of experience when they died. Um, uh, Raymond Moody, sort of the father of this field, is actually my brother-in-law, And so, he has these very specific elements of what he says a near-death experience is, floating out of the body, going down a tunnel, seeing a light, etc. We did not find that, interestingly enough. Um, what we found was, even to me, more extraordinary, which is that when we die, we become conscious, aware, and awake, and our consciousness expands beyond, our current mind brain. Um, and so, this is, people that have shared dying experiences, for example, frequently report that they also share that sense of expanded consciousness. And then the specific aspects of each experience, I think, are very unique uh, to your own individual person. However, not really. The first girl that we studied, Crystal Merlock, that I was telling you about, that survived in the community swimming pool, she said that she crawled to heaven through a tunnel that was lined with bricks, and that she met a woman dressed in white named Elizabeth. And this Elizabeth took her to heaven, where she met various playmates and was even given a choice to return to her body. Um, so I talked to her parents, who are deeply religious Mormons, and discovered that that isn't what they taught their child about death. There's no brick lined tunnel to heaven. In fact, they said to explain death as that the body is a glove, and when we die, the glove comes off, and then the hand that was, hidden, it becomes, is still alive. And they had a very conventional view of heaven. And there was nobody named Elizabeth, even either in their family or in their religious, hierarchy, or nobody knows, why there was an Elizabeth. And so that really told me that there was, that this wasn't just a child spouting back what everybody else had told them about what heaven is like, um, but that this was a truly unique experience. And the children themselves are very, struggle to understand it. Um, so we actually were quite shocked to find that we studied 26 patients, and 24 of them had some sort of experience associated with the processes of dying, uh, a conscious experience, even though we knew that they were clinically dead. And by convention, the gods of neuroscience that I studied at Hopkins, taught us that, if your brain isn't working, you're not conscious. Well, these children defied that. And for our control patients had this type of experience. So, we, I think, effectively showed that these experiences are not caused by a lack of oxygen to the brain. They're not caused by drugs or reaction, fear death type of experience, but they're somehow tied to the very processes of dying itself. And, people often say, well, this isn't science, science doesn't endorse this. In fact, it does. We published our findings in the American Medical Association's pediatric journals. We published in the Lancet, which is arguably the world's most, prestigious medical journal. And our study was replicated by a guy named Pin von Lummel, a cardiologist in Holland, and he found the same kinds of things. Interestingly enough, he did not, adults don't seem to, children seem to universally have this experience. Adults, not so much, that, but then he also published in the Lancet. So clearly science is on the side of those who are struggling to understand these experiences. And I would just love to show you the pictures that these children drew me. Okay, so this young girl nearly died of bacterial meningitis. Um, and she had a near death experience. We identified her as nearly dying as part of our study, but she had had this experience and never told her parents about it. She was in therapy, seeing a therapist because she was still having nightmares and from being ill and such as that. She never told her therapist. And I said to her, I said, why didn't you tell anybody about this experience? She says to me, I didn't think you were supposed to be able to talk to God. So she at her young age knew that, that we can believe in God, but people who actually talk to God are probably crazy. It's what people often think. Um, so here she draws herself. Can you see my little arrow?
Yes, I can see your
Okay,
cursor.
so there she is. She's on the hospital gurney. Notice that the figure at the head of the bed is wearing a hat. That's a little detail that she put in there. That is in fact correct. The custom at our hospital is that the team leader of a resuscitation wears a hat so they can be quickly identified in the hub of resuscitation. So this is not the kind of detail that you would have expected her, if she was just, mimicking, resuscitation she saw on TV or anything like that. Here's my partner, Dr. David Christopher. Here's his hands placed on her chest. She draws him in the perfect American Heart Association position for proper cardiac resuscitation. I teach resuscitation at Children's Hospital at that time, so I told my partner that he gets an A based on this girl's drawing. It's very detailed and accurate. You can see the little crash cart is down there below. And then this is her raising up out of the body. And she sees this rainbow over here in the top left of the corner. She told me that's a light that told her who she was and where she is to go. I mean, you can read any number of religious texts and not hear anything as beautiful as that. The
Right.
light that told her who she was and where she was to go. Then she
Wow.
looks over here, and this is Jesus, who's also wearing a red hat. And again, it's these odd things about the experience that totally convince me that they're real in the sense that, why is Jesus wearing a hat? Well, she said because he was, so that's obviously another little detail and that she's not making up from something she heard in Sunday school, but she's actually seeing something. Jesus is sitting on a log, and there's three angels there. And then in our bottom right hand part of the corner is a door. And she said this was a door where grandpas and grandmas and babies are waiting to be born. They are Lutheran family. They did not have a tradition of reincarnation. And then, of course, to Dr. Morse, I like you very, very much. We don't want to forget that. So this is the type of thing that we saw from children. Let's see if I can get you another one here. So this is one of my favorite experiences, which I think really illustrates that these experiences occur at the point of death, which like, I mean, obviously the point, you might think, well, that's obvious. Really, I think that most people who are skeptical of these experiences think that they're inventions of the mind after the fact. That they're not really reporting on something that actually happened when they died, because after all, their brain wasn't functioning when they died. But that, this is what the medical term for it would be a confabulation, just sort of an invention of the mind that these children are trying to, fool us or con us. But it's just that the mind naturally wants to tell a story. That is not what's going on here. This young girl died of, died and was resuscitated of infectious mononucleosis. We had to put a needle in her heart to resuscitate it. So that's near death by any criteria. That you don't have to wonder, were they really, near death or not? And she doesn't remember anything about when she collapsed at home, when she's taken to her private doctor's office, when she came to Seattle Children's Hospital, when she was in the intensive care unit. She has no memories of anything like that. So that's in keeping with what, I was taught is, typical neurology. She's comatose, so she doesn't remember anything, except She has one memory that she localizes. She says, but something happened to me when you were telling those nurses you needed that crash cart thing. So she has this one memory. And she says that at that moment that she went somewhere and saw her grandmother. So this is her grandmother. And she said, she goes, I was so shocked to see her. That's why, again, I'm just going to repeat it again to you why I'm so thrilled that you asked me to be on your show, that I can share this with you. Because when you hear these experiences the first time, that's when you really understand their authenticity. After she's told the story 5 times, 10 times, 20 times, she's not shocked anymore. But the first time she told me this story, she goes, I was just so shocked to see her because, of course, she had died. She said that she was sitting in a chair and she's surrounded by this white light. And then the girl says to me, and then I was back. I said, oh, you were back? What do you mean by that? And she shakes her fist and she goes, that's what I'm trying to figure out.
Oh,
So
wow.
again, that little detail, then of course is lost. It's you have to hear these experiences for the first time that they tell them. She said, "Boy, you know," and later on she confides to me. She says, "I'm not really so much afraid of dying anymore because I know a little bit more about it now." That she again thought of dying as being a very pleasant experience. Um, so yeah, and that's her entire experience. That she went somewhere, saw her grandmother, excuse me, sitting on a chair, dressed in white, and then she was back. Presumably back in her body is what she means by that. Um, so that's what I mean by that. Each of these experiences are so unique. They're so different. This is a little girl who comes from an atheist family. So they don't believe in God, I mean, had no religious traditions whatsoever. And her experience is very similar. You can see she's lying on a gurney here. She nearly died of diabetic ketoacidosis, which is a severe form of diabetes. She had a blood sugar level of greater than 2,000, which we don't usually associate with, survival. Had a cardiac arrest. And during that time, this is what she thought was happening. She said that 3 doctors approached her at her bedside. I said, well, how'd you know they were doctors? She said, well, they were 14 feet tall and they had light bulbs in their bodies, just like all the other doctors I know. I mean, obviously, a more religious child would have called them, angels or something. But that's what she said. She said, there's 3 doctors and they encourage you to push a button on this, box, obviously is a, representation of the crash cart. Uh, but they told her if she pressed the green button, that she could go with them. Or if she pressed the red button, she could, return to her family. Um, Now, I just have to introduce this from, just take a break from this for a minute, Tia, because I know that there's parents who are listening to this whose children have passed. And so it's always a painful thing. Well, if this little girl had this choice, why didn't my child have a choice? Why didn't, well, I just, want to compassionately remind everybody that we all are going to die. We all are. So none of us truly have a choice, to make these decisions. And I'm just going to tell you my own take on it. I have 6 children, and when my child is playing outside, um, and I want them to go inside, I'll often put it in terms of a choice. I'll often say, do you want to stay here or do you want to go in and see mommy? But it's not really a choice. I mean, if they choose to stay there, I'm going to pick them up and bring them inside the house or, or whatever. So I just want to to honor that. I know that this is a painful thing for parents to hear, for some parents, and yet we do know that consciousness does survive. These children are going somewhere. Um, the experience doesn't just end with this. I'm going to try pushing. Look at this. Can you see that?
Yes, I can see that.
Oh, great. Okay, here's a near-death experience. I just love this one. This one was a very simple near-death experience. Again, a young man that we resuscitated. Um, it's, I just love it because he said that his friends were there. Matthew and well, one of them's Grandpa, and I can't remember the other one's name. You can see him drawn there, and then you can see a figure that's exactly like the other figures. But he said, "Oh, that was God." So when God appears to them, it seems as real as this experience. It's not like seeing a ghost or one young man who he was on a beach and he dug himself, one of those big, he dug a big pit. And then the walls of the pit fell in on him and he was buried under the sand. And he told me that he also met what he initially called a wizard, um, and then identified it later as Jesus. After he talked with his parents and such, but he explained to me that it was the same as I said, "What was it like talking to Jesus?" And he said, "Oh, exactly like talking with you." So these are very, very real experiences. So, they're not hallucinatory. They're not like seeing a ghost, or anything like that. They're as real as any other kind of experience. Let's see if I can get to another one here. Oh, great. Okay. So this young man here in our top left here, I'm going to have a close up of this. So don't worry that you can't see it that well. This is his whole experience that he drew for me. And he said that when he died, hands reached into his body and pulled him out. So you can't see that well, but he draws the hands and plunged him into darkness. Well, so now we understand what this darkness is. The darkness is the death of the body. You're no longer getting sensory input through your eyes or your hearing or that's the darkness that I was taught, that when we die we go just die into the dark, into black. But consciousness persists, and then he draws the darkness, and then he said he saw a light, but you can see he draws it. That's why I love the children's drawings, because what he calls a light is clearly much more than a light. And then comes more light, and then this is heaven to this 7 or 8 year old boy, a pup tent in a golden field. He was a Cub Scout, etc. So, this can be confusing to people. Um, you know, well, how come one person saw a pup tent, another person saw Jesus sitting on a log, and a third person saw, a more conventional heaven? Does that mean they're all making it up? Absolutely not. What it means is they've seen something that is so profound, and they only have their own vocabulary, their own imagery, their own spiritual vocabulary to describe it. So of course he says it was a pup tent in a golden field. That's what you know heaven is to him. And then he draws this picture. You can just sort of barely see there's a rainbow, common theme. Let's see if those. Yeah, see, look at these. This is like an 8-year-old boy drew these, by the way. These are the hands that reached in and pulled him out of his body. And the other thing I love about children is they only tell us, Tia, exactly what they experience. So he does not say, "Oh, it was the hand of God." He doesn't say, he doesn't say anything. He says exactly what he experienced. Big hands reached in and pulled him out of his body. And that's what he describes. So they're very faithful. There's the light I was telling you about. So this experience here, this gentleman, this is a young man named Chris Eggleston, and this this young man, he moved me from just I was doing cancer research at the time. So this near death research to me was just sort of, just another paper to publish. Never been published before. It was a great study of children. There had been no study of it done before. Frankly, we wanted to show that a woman named Elizabeth Kubler-Ross was wrong about these experiences. We wanted to prove that they were caused by a lack of oxygen to the brain, et cetera, which in fact we were not able to show. Um, but so yeah, we proved Elizabeth Kubler-Ross to be right. But this young man here, after describing his experience to me, he says, "Was it real? Because if it was real, you've got to tell all the old people." Yeah. And so that is in fact why I left cancer research and spent the rest of my career trying to establish, from a scientific point of view, are these experiences real? Yeah, if we have time, I would like to tell you his entire experience because it touches on your own experience, Tia.
Yeah, we have
Uh,
plenty of time.
oh, great. So, all right. So this young man has a very amazing story. His parents were ski instructors, and this was Pacific Northwest is where I was working at the time, and they were coming home from a day of teaching skiing on the slopes, and it was heavy snow, and they were coming down the mountain, and they could only see the road because of the head, the tail lights of a car in front of them, and there was a car behind them that was following them, and they saw a slid off of went over a bridge and slid and hit the guardrail and flipped over the guardrail, and the car plunged into the river below. Uh, what's extraordinary is in this driving snow, the person who was following them suddenly saw their taillights disappear. And, I always wonder when I hear this story if I would have done this because he actually stopped. He said, "That's strange. Why did their taillights disappear?" And he actually stopped and went and looked for them. And he was awarded the Washington State's citizen award for heroism because of his actions. He realized that they had flipped over the guardrail and they were in the river below. And he called in resuscitation, our team, basically. And then he went down and attempted to resuscitate and to rescue the children and the parents himself. There's two children. The brother had died and could not be freed. Chris, we did eventually, after about 45 minutes, get him out of the car, and he was eventually resuscitated. And then his mother was able to free herself by kicking out the windshield, and she swam to the surface and now was saved. So this little boy, his experience was that he felt, again, why I so honored that I could hear these experiences for the first time, because he says to me, "I was in a huge noodle." And then he gets this weird look on his face and he goes, "No, it couldn't have been a noodle because noodles don't have rainbows in them. It must have been a tunnel." And again, you only hear that once. Then when he tells the story, it's always, he saw a rainbow in a tunnel, etc. And he said that he was taken first. He mistakenly went to the animal heaven where he was comforted by a bee. The bee gave him some bread, and then he went to human heaven. So again, all these sort of odd elements here that don't really match, any, religious, Sunday school stories or anything like that. And then he said to me, like I said, he said, "But was my experience real?" But his mother then said to me, I want to know too, because if his experience was real, then my experience was also real. And here was her experience after she had been, resuscitated and or not resuscitated, but rescued and taken to the side of the stream. They wrapped her in blankets, and then went back and made the efforts to get everyone else out from the car. And she looks over, and her husband is sitting on a rock next to her. And she looks at him and she's like, why are you just sitting there? Don't you know they're down there trying to get our children? Why are you just sitting there? And he looks at her and he says, everything is as it should be. Everything is all right, you know? And she screams at him because, again, these experiences are vividly real. She screams at him. She says, you know, what, WTF, everything is not all right. Our children are in the car. And she screams at him, and then he vanishes. And in fact, he had died. He was never freed from the car, at least, while he was still alive. Uh, so she had, sort of a semi-shared experience, some semi-after death vision, I suppose. But nevertheless, what I learned from her is that we could show scientifically that near-death experiences are real because there's something that we can systematically study in a hospital, and we can, like I said, we could survive, interview survivors of cardiac, etc. It's much more difficult to scientifically study these sort of after-death visions or premonitions of death or shared dying experience, etc. And yet, there could be no doubt that if the near-death experience is real, then all of these spiritual experiences surrounding death and dying are real. And we, anyone who has these types of experiences can feel comforted that they had a real experience, that this was not some sort of crazy hallucination, or as this mother said to me, she said, you know, that before I had interviewed her son, she said, I always thought it was a crazy widow's fantasy. Uh, and now she was aware that this was a real experience. This experience here, what you had said to me made me think of this experience. This young man here died of kidney failure, and it's very dramatic. When we resuscitated him, he opened his eyes and he said, "That was weird. You guys just sucked me back into my body." But the picture that he drew, he said he said that it really were all these sort of dots radiating out from his body. He said they looked like airplane landing lights, is the way he described it. And he just sort of not didn't describe really a tunnel or anything like that, but just a sort of array of bright dots, just sort of bursting from his body and going somewhere. And again, when children describe these experiences, they just describe fragments of a powerful experience. So if you remember earlier, I was telling you about confabulation. Confabulation is that natural instinct to make up a story to explain a memory. We confabulate all the time. When they do studies of memory, and they ask somebody about their 12th birthday party, people will go on and on and on and describe their 12th birthday party. And then you look at their parents, and the parents go, no, he actually didn't have a birthday party. What is 12? It's just the mind, when asked a question like that, just, wants to invent something. But these experiences aren't the flavor of confabulation. They're just these fragments, these like, you sucked me into my body. And then I saw all these lights and they were radiating out of my body. And then they have nothing more to say. They don't try to explain them. They don't create a story to go with them. Here you can see a little bit better. You can see the sort of that these all, had all different colors to these lights. coming out of his body. Oh, this is one of my favorite ones. Okay, so this was a humbling experience for me as a critical care doc. Um, this young girl here, um, she was successfully resuscitated. And, I was talking with the nurses and the medical students and it's talking about how we resuscitated her and, all this kind of stuff. And she frantically waves and she wants her etch a sketch. She has a trach tube in, that, we're breathing for her. And you can't see it because the etch a sketch is over it. But she wanted that etch a sketch so she could write God save to me. She wanted to make sure we knew it wasn't you, bud. It was God saved me.
Oh.
you know, and sure enough, I'm sure she was right. Hey, that's that picture. That's that picture. It's just a close up of the picture I was telling you before. This is Jesus sitting on a log. Um, there's in that right hand corner the grandpas and grandmas and babies waiting to be born. Something that she got out of her experience that does not come from her religious background. These deeply religious Lutherans did not believe in reincarnation. This is just a reminder that the experience is one of love. That I would say that's the rather than the other things that we hear are the hallmarks of a near-death experience. Really, it's that sense of interaction with unconditional love. When a child said to me, this was his entire experience. He said, "I saw a light, and it had a lot of good things in it." That was his whole experience. Um, but was conscious at the point of death. Clearly localizes that experience to the time that he was nearly died. This young girl here, she draws she said she saw a rainbow. There's clearly more than a rainbow. You can see it's anchored by two hearts, sort of, hearts are all around it. Some creatures down there that, have tails with hearts. And again, I just love talking to kids because I said, so who are those creatures down there? I don't know. So they're not inventing something. They're faithfully trying to tell us what they heard and saw. And they're not really embellishing or, so, I don't know what they are. I just saw them. Here's one that I particularly like. Remember I was telling you that the children, in trying to explain this experience, they'll interpret it with what they know. So this little girl here, she nearly died of, I think she had bacterial meningitis, but had a cardiac arrest. And she said that her living teacher was at her bedside when we were resuscitating her. That's her living teacher right down there. And these are her living classmates who are singing to her. And she said they were dressed in white and they sounded like a choir. But she identifies them as her living playmates. So that's, I think, a nice example of, how we make sense of this. This little girl had not had any relatives who had died. She had no expectations. So when whatever this light is that comes to us when we die, for her, the elementary school kids are crazy about their teachers. And so it came in a form that is most, powerful and most, best way to connect with her. And I think that I just, it breaks my heart to go on Facebook and read these various near death groups because again and again I see that, the confusion over that. Wait a minute, it can't be real if she saw her living teacher. But think about it. When I die, if my wife dies before me, I'm going to see my wife. When who's ever listening to this, when they die, they're not going to see my wife. They're going to see somebody who's important in their life. That doesn't mean the experience isn't real. That means the experience is extremely real. It's extremely personal. It's not like, like if we see the color red, all agree it's the color red. But these are experiences that are outside our common. Uh, we don't know how to describe these experiences. We don't have a common language for them. So of course, I'm going to say it was my wife, and this little girl is going to say it was my teacher. What have you. A lot of times the experiences have actually their own validation. This little girl here, who also had fulminant diabetic, she was in a diabetic coma. She said she was out of her body looking down on herself. She said that there was a woman doctor at her bedside who was wearing a green mask. That is correct. But remember, this was back in the 1980s when there was very few women doctors. That's not the first thing that we thought of as a woman doctor back then. And there would be no reason for a child in diabetic coma to have for the nurse or the doctor to have a green mask. But they in fact thought this was not my patient but another patient at Seattle Children's, and the doctors thought that she had an infectious disease, and so they were protecting themselves with a mask. She doesn't seem to have an IV. We don't see any, and that is in fact correct. They were unable to get an IV in her. She had to go to surgery to have an IV placed. Yeah, we saw this picture before, but here's a better shot of it. This was a young boy with the pup tent in the Golden Field, and we can see these rainbows a little bit better that he drew. And again, I just love it. He says, "Then there was rainbows," but the picture is so much more than that. There's that darkness. Um, this young man here, again, died of cardiac arrest from near drowning. I do. I'm often, people are, oh, are they really near death, or blah blah blah. It's helpful in that most of these are my own patients. We knew that they were dead. Uh, that they're what we call clinically dead. Um, I think sometimes we get the idea from television or what have you that if your heart stops beating, all doctors have to do is put on the paddles and they'll start your heart again. That is in fact not correct. We had to review about 400 charts to find 26 children who survived cardiac arrest. If your heart stops beating, eh, you're most likely going to die. Yeah, that's all there is to it. This young man here, he said that he was in a tunnel, but it's obviously more than a tunnel. We can see at the end of the tunnel is this very sort of bright rainbows. And then again, we sort of these sort of blue horns here. I asked him, so what are those horns? I don't know. Just they were part of his experience. He's not trying to make something up to explain them. This young girl here, she saw a light, and yet this is her description, her picture of the light. Again, a rainbow and the sort of sun with a light radiating out of it. And yet her entire experience, in fact, she said she saw light. But remember, that's very different from our control patients. We actually, we had 26 children that survived cardiac arrest. We had hundreds of control patients because we wanted to make sure we were totally capturing, the whole range of factors that might trigger these experiences. None of our control patients said, I saw a light. All of our control patients said what you'd expect. They said, I don't remember being in the intensive care unit, or being at the hospital, or whatever their language for it was. They didn't remember anything, as we would expect. It's only when they came to the point of death that, boom, consciousness returns. Okay, let's see if I can make this one bigger. Here's another one that I sort of love, these ones that sort of have their sort of internal validation with them. This young man here, uh, he was born with what they call a floppy trachea, the tube that goes into your lungs. So it was constantly sort of collapsing and, causing him to stop breathing. So he had to have what's called a trachea, a hole placed in that trachea. And then, of course, the trach is was getting plugged or stopped, and he went into respiratory and cardiac arrest from problems with his trach. And here's his room down there in the right-hand corner. So we're sort of floating above his room and we're looking down. We can see the hospital rooms. And then this right here is a tunnel. You can see a little figure there. So that's him. He's headed towards that tunnel. But then he said over here, he said, my grandpa was there and I saw my grandpa hugging my mother. Well, there is, in fact, no way he could have seen that. Um, his grandpa was not called to the hospital until he was unconscious, until he was nearly dying, and the circumstances are such that the grandpa was not part of their life. He didn't really know his grandfather. One of those situations in families where it was only when this grandson was seriously ill, then suddenly, okay, we better get grandpa involved here. And he said it with surprise. He said, boy, like the little girl I told you about before, I was so shocked to see her. He said, I saw my grandpa, hugging my mom. And that is, in fact, correct. This is an accurate drawing. So they get all these little details correct. Here's another one of my favorite ones. Well, they're all my favorites, you can tell to you.
I can
This
see
little girl,
why.
little girl here, because we always hear about this tunnel and we sort of wonder, what is this tunnel? I mean, is it really a tunnel or, is it some sort of metaphor or whatever? Well, my bias is that it's really a tunnel because this little girl here, that's her. And this is her. She's now coming out of the tunnel, into the place that she thinks of as heaven. And it's very telling. She says that there was colors that that we can't see here on Earth that were in her heavenly realm. And then there's a little castle in there too that she drew. Oh, I love this one. It's a great story. So, what I feel so blessed to have been able to, have done this work. This young man here, um, he had a cardiac arrest when he was 9 months old. He had a cardiac arrest. He was at Seattle Children's Hospital. He had been born with a congenital heart disease and had a very rocky first couple of years of life and had a profound cardiac arrest. So when he was 3 years old, his parents took him to one of these passion plays, the Christmas passion plays kind of thing, where they reenact, the circumstances of Jesus in the manger, etc. And he starts crying. And he says to his mom, that's not Jesus. That's not Jesus. That's not my Jesus. And went on to tell them that he had seen the real Jesus and references at the time tells them it was the time, that my heart stopped or, the time that I died or, whatever words were appropriate for a 3-year-old at that time. So here's his tunnel. He was about 6 when he drew this. So he's sort of darkness and it's going to light. And then there's this realm here that's light where he said he could run and double jump with God. I mean, I think, wow, so I think for parents who are struggling with the loss of a child or, well, I'm certainly not afraid to die. If it means that I will also have that chance to run and double jump with God.
Oh, I know.
That's clearly what the processes of dying are all about. Let's see, I think that's just about my pictures here. I want to tell you one more story from my study, Tia. So I told you that 26 patients we studied, and 24 of them had some version of this experience. Often just saying I saw a light or whatever. Well, so what about the other two? Well, one, we don't know. Just there's no information. Didn't report a near-death experience or anything. But here's the other one. So we again identified this child as having survived cardiac arrest at Seattle Children's Hospital. And so, we enrolled her in our study and we went out and interviewed her. And she told us she didn't remember anything about, the time that she was dead. Okay. So, so at that point, we thanked him and the medical students and I, prepared to leave. And the father says, but wait, don't you want to hear my story? Okay. So here's his story. He and his friend and their daughter, or his daughter, were fishing in Lake Washington and in a small rowboat. And the daughter stood up as, fooling around and lost her balance and fell over and into the murky depths of Lake Washington. And it was an overcast day, as most days in Seattle are. And so she sank into darkness. And the father and the friend immediately dove for her, but of course couldn't find her, and dove again and again until they saw her lit by a bright light that they that they that's how they localized her. They felt that her body was glowing, and they found her and then pulled her, dragged her to the surface and dragged her into the boat, and she was eventually resuscitated.
Wow.
she he and the friend were so skeptical of this that the next day they rented scuba equipment and went and sat at the bottom of Lake Washington because they wanted to see maybe this was just some weird, stray beam of light, or who knows what it could have been. Maybe it was some sort of coincidence or something like that. And they sat down there and no, it's total darkness. And yet she was lit by this bright light. Yeah, all I can tell you is none of our control patients reported that their bodies were lit up by a bright light. Um, so of course, according to our study, we had to check her off as didn't have a near-death experience because our criteria for experience was, did they remember anything that they consciousness at the point of nearly dying. So this changed my life. I can only tell you that. I certainly went from, I wouldn't say I wasn't a believer, but I mean, just, as a critical care doc, I'm just really not thinking that much about that anything happens to us when we die. Um, and yet now understanding that death is very dynamic, that it's very spiritually dynamic. Certainly, my own practice, I can tell you that, for example, um, I was at the bedside of a child who was dying, and I felt that we'd done enough. There was nothing more we could do. And this little boy, he suddenly wakes up and he points to the ceiling and he says, "The horse, the horse, white horse is coming for me." And then he died, just like that. And I felt, as a scientist, I could look those parents in the eye and tell them, yes, that was a real experience. That really happened. Because so many other of these things are clearly real. That it's come to me that, all of these types of experiences I think are completely real. Uh, and that's, I think that makes a huge difference for this family. It transforms them from, my son had some crazy hallucination before he died, probably because of all the drugs those doctors were giving him, which we were, into my son had a profound revelation that the white horse was coming for him, and that was a real experience. And, I think that changes their trajectory of grieving, you know, opens the door, like it did with Chris Eggleston's mom. to then to start to see what she had thought of as a crazy widow's hallucination, to wow, maybe it was her husband sitting on that rock next to her, and maybe it was a real experience with him looking at her and saying, as tragic as this is, you know, obviously this isn't what we wanted, but yet this was meant to be, and this is all right. This, is something you can feel good about. It obviously took months or years for her to be able to process those words, but at least, it opens the door for being able to process that as part of grief.
And you said that you were blessed to be able to do this work, and I couldn't agree with the statement more. That was an incredible blessing to be able to spend your life speaking with these children and learning about their experiences. And I'm blessed now as well for you sharing this with me. So thank you so much for doing that. It means
Yes.
so much to me, and my viewers are now blessed as well. And to be able to see the art that the children created after their experience, it just adds an element of validity to me, because you're right, children are so innocent and they're not trying to convince people of something.
Exactly. Yeah. If
And
anything, they're as puzzled as us by it.
yeah,
That's what I'm trying to figure out.
right. Oh, so thank you for sharing that. I have,
Of course.
I, I know that you have done this research and you believe that there's a God spot in the brain, and I had mentioned that in the intro for you, and I'm just curious of what that is.
There's another thing that I think people struggle with. I just read an article today in Smithsonian Magazine saying scientists find an area in the brain that allows us to have out of body experiences. So the implication being that they must not be real, that just in the brain. Well, Tia, everything that we experience is just in our brain. There's an area in our brain which allows us to have this visual experience that we're sharing. There's an area in the brain which allows us to process the our the sensory organs in our ear sense the electromagnetic impressions that surround us, translates that into bioelectric signals, which then our brain creates an auditory experience. We don't call that a hallucination. We say, I'm really hearing something. So for me as a scientist, the finding that there's actually an area in our brain which allows us to have this experience of perceiving God, to me, makes it more real. That it's not just some sort of hallucination, which by definition is a dysfunction of the brain, but it's the natural functioning of our brain at the point of death. That there's actually, neurobiological structures that permit us to have this experience. And the father of modern neuroscience is a guy named Wilder Penfield. And the way he learned the way the brain worked, as bizarre as this might seem, in his patients, when he's operating on them, he actually stimulated with big electric needles all different areas of their brain. So when he stimulated, an area on the left side of the motor cortex, patients would raise their right arm. And, when he stimulated language areas, patients would have the perception of saying things. And when he stimulated this God spot, patients said things like, oh God, I'm leaving my body. Or even more interestingly, they would say things like, I'm half in and I'm half out. So the knowledge that we have, that we're hardwired, in other words, to perceive God. Whether you want to believe in God or not, I think, that's up to you. I think the same issue, like for example, Tia, people say to me, well, the near death experience is just some sort of hallucination that happens to people when they're dying. Okay, I accept that. I mean, there's certainly no way as a scientist I can dispute that, but I would just, as you see, I put it in different terms that the near death experience is the natural process of dying. All of us will go through this experience. As Dr. Kennedy, I was telling you, one of the most profound near death experiences I've ever heard is Dr. Kennedy said to us that he learned from his experience that life is about learning to love like that, meaning the light that came to him when he died. Or he said, even more importantly, learning to accept the love that others have for us. So, of course, we could just dismiss that as a hallucination. We could just say, oh, well, sure, you know, but I think if you're going to do that, I could dismiss this experience as a hallucination. I don't really know you're real. I mean, I think that when you go down that road, uh, that you're getting into philosophy, which is a neuroscientist I'm not really part of. But nevertheless, the finding that we have specific biological structures in our brain is not just a God spot. I published that in 2004. There's been no pushback from the scientific community, by the way, since we published it, except a guy named Mario Beauregard. He published a book in 2011, I think, or so. And he said, no, 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 Dr. Morse has got it all wrong. It's not a God spot, it's a God brain. He identified at least 30% of the structures of our brain allow us to perceive God. And that for many of us, these structures do not start to work properly until the final moments of our life. I think dismissing that profound spiritual experience as a hallucination, sure, you can. But I mean, that's just your belief system. Please don't call that a scientific statement.
If my viewers wanted to find you, maybe do a little more looking into your research, how can they find you?
Our website, it's melvinmorsemd.com. So it's melvinmorse.com. And I've got all videos on there. And, I discuss after death experiences. I discuss spiritual neuroscience, for those who want to take a deep dive on the scientific aspects of this. But for those of you who've had spiritual experiences or near death experiences or shared dying experiences, science has got your back. In the year 2024 is a scientific fact that near death experiences are real. And I think by association, all the spiritual experiences surrounding death and dying are real. So, and you can email me through my website. That's how you got a hold of me. Might not get back right away, but I will get back to you.
Do you have any last words of wisdom for my viewers?
Yeah, I do actually. I rarely meet anybody who hasn't had one of these experiences. And yet, when I ask them, if you just sort of ask people out of the blue, have you ever had a spiritual experience? They'll say no. And they'll say, oh, yeah, it's never happened to me, etc. But oftentimes it's because my brother-in-law Raymond Moody, he's given us such a profound sense of exactly what it must be. It has to be out of the body, down the tunnel, into the light. Well, a woman that I met said to me, I was really disappointed because when I died, I didn't have this experience. And I said, oh, that's interesting. Tell me more about that. She said, yeah, all that happened to me was it was darkness all around me. And then I thought my dad was hugging me and I just felt so warm and safe. And yet she didn't see that as a near death experience. So what I guess I'm saying is trust yourself. You have the same neurobiological equipment that the rest of us have. You have the same 30% of your brain allowing you to have these kinds of experiences and uh, trust that they're real. Look into your own life and you will find that you've had these types of experiences and probably dismissing them, trivializing them, or other people have convinced you that it was just a crazy dream.
Thank you so much, Dr. Morse, for being my guest
So
today. It's
welcome.
been an amazing and incredible honor, and I loved every minute of it.
Thank you. Well, I'm sure this was wonderful. I'd be happy to come back anytime.
Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
Thank you for being here. I just want to tell you how much I appreciate you being here and supporting my channel. If you haven't already subscribed, please consider subscribing if you enjoy near death experiences and other spiritually transformative stories. It helps the algorithm know that this information is useful and push it out to more people. And that's the goal, to get as many people to know that we are eternal spiritual beings and that we never die. Our bodies might die, but our essence will never die. And I want people to live with less fear. Let's all spread the word. Like, comment, subscribe, share, hit that little notification bell so you get all the notifications when my videos post. Thank you for all of your support. I'm sending love to you.